Hi, everybody. We're the Committee of Women Writers, and this is the Committee of Career Longevity. And we banded together to put on this fantastic event honoring Rita Lakin in conversation with Loraine Despres. And I have a feeling that all of you know who Rita is.
No, I do not know who Rita Lakin is.
She is an Emmy-nominated, WGA award-winning, Edgar Allan Poe award-winning,
former board member,
Harper Avery award-winning,
former board member,
screenwriter, showrunner,
trailblazer.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and as part of the Women's Committee, I'm Susan Olsen Davis. I'm the co-chair of the Women's Committee,
and I'm Christiana Miller.
And she's the co-chair. We're both co-chairs, and we read Rita's book, and we are just amazed at the things that she's done for women in this industry, and we just owe so much to her, and we're really delighted to have you here. And as many of you know, she came from San Francisco for this event tonight.
What have you done for men in this?
Yep. And she's also mentored Steven Bochco, so there you go. She's done something for men too, right?
Yeah, yep, that's true.
And we love Loraine. She wrote the iconic episode of Who Shot J.R. on Dallas. And she's also a novelist. Scandalous Summer of Sissy LeBlanc and The Bad Behavior of Belle Cantrell. And they worked on some of the same shows. You worked on a show with your son, right?
Right.
So this should be a really fun
Dallas
evening.
worked on the same show with you.
Yeah.
But
And I also wrote an episode of Dynasty, but
well, so
And you
did I.
turned down Dallas, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And Loraine picked it up. So it should be
14 years. Stupid.
All right, we're gonna let you guys talk.
Rita Lakin has had an amazing career. It lasted not for a year or a decade, but it lasted 3 decades. She wrote 464 series episodes, 8 movies of the week, 2 miniseries, and created 2 television series. I think that calls for applause.
Thank you. Since all of you here were paid to come here, you know all this.
Now, you started work in the business in 1962. What was the world like then? You want to set the scene for us?
It's the 1950s. Good Housekeeping magazine was our Bible. Men went to work. Women stayed home. They met their husbands at the door at the end of the day with a martini in their hand. And if they were college graduates, such as I was, and most of my friends, we had hobbies. And I wrote short stories. It was a hobby. And the men used to say, "Isn't that cute? Isn't that sweet?" And that was our lives. And we liked it. I think most of us were happy until books like The Woman's Room came out, if you remember that one, and told us how unhappy we really were. But I liked my life, and I liked being home. I had 3 very small children. And, okay, you all know it anyway. My husband died very young, very unexpectedly, and I suddenly had to go out to work. And I really was feeling very sorry for myself because I didn't want to go out to work. I wanted to stay home where it was safe. And I wanted to stay home with my children because that's what mothers did in those days. In fact, it was such an era that if you weren't married by 22, and if you weren't at least pregnant by 24, people started talking about you behind your back because there was something wrong with you. And that's the way we lived, and that's the way it was. And I'm sure that you women who are sitting here who are young must find that absolutely ridiculous. But that's the way it was. So I had to go out and get a job. And for some bizarre reason, which I never understood, I didn't go to Woolworths or I didn't go to Sears. I started going to all the movie studios because I was living in Van Nuys, which was not far from movie studios. And I didn't know why I was doing it. And I think there must have been something in me, which will be a recurring theme throughout the book, as you'll see, is that I did a whole lot of things without knowing why I did them. And there was some kind of intuition that was working underneath that was probably trying to save me.
Tell us how you got this job at Universal.
Oh, well, that was fun. So I went to Universal Studios, and this lovely lady was beautifully dressed, and I looked like hell because I don't have an outfit worth wearing. And she interviewed me, and the first thing she said to me is, "How many words can you type?" And I thought for a while, and I said 6. And then she asked me what was I, Pittman, or what I know in terms of shorthand. I said, well, I flunked that course, and I did not know how to take shorthand. Or so she said, why are you here wanting to be a secretary? I said, because I need a job. And I had been to many studios, and I knew this was my last shot at it, because I was not going to get this job. So I played what we now call things like the widow card. We didn't use expressions like that in those days. So I shed a tear or two, and I told her about my little tiny baby. There's my little tiny baby right now. He was 9 months old at the time. Anyway, so I told her my sad story, dead husband, blah, 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 and I had to work, blah, blah, blah. And she said, okay. And she took me around the studio. It was really wonderful because Universal was very interesting. There was this huge black building that had just been built, and they called it the Dark Tower eventually. And then there was these darling little cottages all around that looked like England. And every little cottage had beautiful antique furniture. It was just lovely. And then she said, this is where you're going to work, in this cottage. And I thought, this is really great. And as soon as I was about to walk in the door, Cary Grant walks in his door, next door, and then I hear dogs barking, and somebody mentions that's Doris Day's dogs. And I said, this is nice. I can do this. So that was my job. And the reason she gave me this job with these 2 marvelous men, and every once in a while you'll see me looking down, because I'll tell you right now, there are no more nouns. And I'll have to look up names. So my bosses were Dale Sheets and Ned Tannen, 2 gorgeous hunks of guys. I wish Dale could have come tonight, but he wasn't able to make it. And they were very good to me, and they never ever asked for, did any dictation. All I had to do was dial the phone. Remember dialing phones? And that's all I ever had to do. And the secretary who worked next to me, Melody, her name was, all she did all day long was polish her nails and look for next door to find out when Cary Grant would come out again. And she'd run out with holding a thing in her hand to look busy, and she'd try to talk to him. That was my job. And that's the way it was. And
But you started reading scripts, right?
yes, I was actually bored.
Yeah.
And I decided, well, I'm at a studio and they have these scripts and I watch these shows. And so I put my boss on the list, and he never ever got scripts before. He was kind of surprised to find himself there. But so I started reading scripts, and I wasn't very impressed because one was Dragnet, and it was okay, but it didn't interest me that much. And there was another one by Ward Bond. I can't even remember what that, Wagon Train. Thank you. You're on the job. And so I started reading these scripts, and I thought to myself, well, surely I'll make more money writing a script than being a secretary. And I had already sold some short stories in my hobby days. And that was interesting because that was a foreshadow of what was coming, because I had been told if I wanted to sell short stories, I shouldn't use my name because they didn't buy from women. So I used my initials, and I sold my stories. So that was like the beginning of this trip in this book, which is what's happened with women when I started and how different it is today.
Well, even in the 60s, the film schools were turning out graduates, and they all had scripts.
Mm-hmm.
And so how did you get yours read?
Well, that was my wonderful bosses. See how she does these questions? She knows just what I'm going to say.
I'm magic.
Yeah, you're doing perfectly. So we used to have agents who came in to the office to sell things to Ned and Dale, actors and writers and directors and stuff. And so Dale grabbed one of these guys one day, and he was this cute little guy who came in. His name is Mel Bloom. He was short, and he was frisky, and he was neurotic, and he was jumpy, and he, like your average agent. Anyway, Dale nabbed him and said, "Read her script." Oh, I left out that whole thing about Cole's Trapnell. In those days, I was looking for a way to learn how to write scripts. And I found one book. Now you could probably find 550 books on how to get into showbiz and write and direct and all that. There was one by somebody named Cole's Trapnell. And he was a teacher in Midwest somewhere. I think he'd never written a script in his life, but he wrote this book. And he had this saccharine advice that went something like this: someday someone will open a door for you, and you will be able to walk in, an opportunity will knock, and you've got to be ready. And I looked to see what I had to do to be ready. He said, write a script. He didn't quite tell me how to do this, but so anyway, I had these scripts that I taught myself from these scripts, and I wrote a Ben Casey script as a sample. And that's when Mel Bloom showed up. So there we are, and Dale says to Mel, you should hire her. She's a great writer. And of course, Dale hadn't read a word, not a word. And Mel looks at me and he says, "You're a girl. What are you talking about? There are no women writers around here." He says, "Well, I mean, there's couples. There's Gwen Bagni and Paul Dubove," and he listed a whole group of them. He said, "There's no women writing by themselves. What are you talking about?" And he says, "Can you find some man to write with?" I said, "I don't think so." So Dale made him take the script home, and he read it. And the next thing I knew, he had gotten me a meeting with David Victor at Dr. Kildare.
But not only David Victor, Sidney Pollack.
Sidney Pollack.
That was her first job.
He was so young and so gorgeous, and I was so naive and so stupid. I had my chance, but I blew it. Anyway, David Victor was a wonderful man. He was, if you want to picture Santa Claus, this roly-poly guy, so kind. All he did was just keep giving jobs to people, writers and directors. And probably a lot of famous people started with David Victor. He was wonderful.
It was Sidney Pollack's first film.
It was his very first job, and the two of them were marvelous. And so then I had my meeting, and I practiced in front of a mirror all these ideas for stories like drugs and killings in the hospital, and I had all these topics. And I'm called to this meeting with the two of them, and I'm pitching these ideas, and we did it. We did it. Last season, we did that idea. Last month, we did that one. And I'm saying, oh God, I'm dead before I even get started. So I figured I wanted to kill Cole's Trapnell because he never warned me about pitch meetings. But all of a sudden, the two of them say, well, wait a minute, you're a woman, and we don't really do a lot of scripts from a woman's point of view. You notice what's happening here? There's a surprise on everybody.
Half the population happened to be women, but who knew?
But who knew? You would never know from them. But so they suddenly had this great idea, and they wondered if I'd be interested in doing it. And it happened to be about a widow with some small children. And I said, oh my, I wonder where they got that from. And my agent is looking around here whistling, So that's my first assignment.
Then after that, you got a very classy gig on Bob Hope Presents Chrysler Theater and Dick Berg. What happened?
Before I go to Dick Berg, can I tell you the really funny thing that happened, because it's really wonderful. I'm so excited they're going to be doing a script of mine. And I decide I'm going to sneak into the set, because in those days, if you want to know, they didn't invite writers to the set, young people, never. So I go and I sneak in, and there I see this little 7-year-old, adorable little redhead with freckles, and he's going to play my son in the script, and he's a little boy named Ronnie Howard. See, it all started that way with people like David Victor. I mean, it was wonderful. And anyway, so I'm waiting for the big moment when they're going to speak my lines, and all of a sudden I'm looking at Raymond Massey and
Richard Chamberlain.
thank you. I'm not kidding about nouns. Richard Chamberlain, and they're about to do a scene, and all of a sudden Massey takes my script, stamps it to the ground, steps all over it, and says, "Who wrote this crap?" So I tiptoed out fast as I could. But of course, everybody else loved the script, and Richard Chamberlain told me years later that he said that about every script. But now we're up to Bob Hope.
So then you got to do a very classy gig at the Bob Hope Presents Chrysler Theater and Dick Berg. What happened?
Well, that was interesting too. So my agent is very proud of himself. He sent my Kildare script over to Dick Berg, who is the producer of this incredible new show that was coming on called the Bob Hope Theater. And there was a lot of excitement about it because they were hiring all the most famous writers in the world to come in, movie writers.
Rod Serling, William Inge, Bud Schulberg, Sterling Silliphant.
Right,
You can
people
thank
like
me.
that. And they were inviting me, not only a female, because they had no female writers mentioned, but a beginner. And so I go up to the top of the tower where Dick Berg is, and those of you who've read the book must be bored by now. And I get up to the tower, and there's Dick Berg in this very plush office, incredibly plush office. And he's a tall guy with hair hanging down, and he's very intense and very smart. And he plops me down on a couch, and he starts walking around the couch, back and forth, rather than I'm looking like this, and I'm going like that, and I don't know what the hell he's doing. And every time he looks at me, he says a dirty word, curse words, the filthiest words imaginable, that half of which I'd never even heard before. It's 1962. I didn't know much. I didn't know very many nasty words. Anyway, he keeps going, and he's dancing around and doing this, and I'm looking at him. I think the man's crazy. But he's also funny, so I'm clapping and keeping up with him. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. So I just sat there until he was finished, and suddenly he throws a book at me, and he says, "Here, adapt this novel." And he walks me to the door. And I'm really thrilled. I mean, I'm going to do something incredible. And he says, "Call me as soon as you know what you're going to do with it." And as I'm going out the door, I said, "Mr. Berg, can I ask you why you did all that dance around me?" He said, "Well, you're a woman, and I've never worked with a woman before. This theme keeps going through. Never worked with a woman before. And, I don't want any prissy dame sitting there going, oh, when I accidentally drop some bad word." And he said, "Well, that was a test, and you passed it because you didn't blink an eye." I just thought he was nuts. So I got that job.
But
But
then there was a
But.
problem.
what happened was some eager person on Variety decided to write me up. I didn't even know anything about it. And Mel Bloom, my agent, comes running in one day with the Variety. He says, listen to this, you're in the trades." And he reads me this whole thing about secretary, breaks in, rank beginner, never done anything before, forgot that I had done something, going to work with William Inge, Sterling Sullivan, and it went on and on and on. And she's a secretary. Isn't that incredible? Huh. Well, that didn't work out too well because,
Shirley Jones.
well, before we get to that, every writer, every famous writer had a famous actress or actor attached to it. Anne Bancroft was with William Inge. And unfortunately for me, Shirley Jones did not want a secretary. And the sad part is, I hadn't been so new and so young, and if my agent hadn't thought of it, we would have met with Shirley. We would have told her about me, and it would have turned out entirely different, I'm sure, because I couldn't believe. But at the moment, it was handled wrong.
Yeah.
It was totally handled wrong. And I got knocked out of the box. Sterling Sullivan had to write an entire script over a 2-day weekend, and they shot it on the Monday.
Wow.
But as I don't have to tell any of you, there's ups and downs in this business. Wins and losses, and good times and bad times. Blah, blah, blah.
But
Moving right along.
even when I came into Hollywood about 17 years later, most of the women writers I met were writing with their writer-producer husbands.
Still.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But you did meet women writers in the mid-'60s.
Yeah, I did.
Some of them were married to their writer-producer husbands,
Right.
but some of them
That's right.
were alone. You want to tell us about that?
That's when I got to Peyton Place. That's when I got to Peyton Place. And it was heaven on earth because it's the first time I ever met women. It's the first time I was going to work on a show as a staff writer. And the first time I got to work with men. Where's my guy? There you were, Michael. Michael Gleason was there with me at that time. Wonderful writer. The guys were adorable. They were just adorable. Michael Gleason, John Wilder, and Lee, help me, Lee Siegel, and and one other guy. What was his name?
Jerry Zygmunt?
Jerry Zygmunt, who I guess left the business.
Rita, what year would that have been?
That year was 1965. Paul Monash was wonderful. He really liked women. I think he liked them a lot. But he did hire us. He also had a woman as his story editor, Nina Lemley, who was wonderful. And that show was also with Dick DeRoy working on it. We had a fabulous time. We had such fun. We used to sneak away all the time and go shopping and do other things. I sort of rewrote that last scene a little bit, but you won't mind, Michael. I sort of did a little addition to it. But but there was one, the three women were Peggy Shaw, Sonia Roberts, and Carol Sobieski. Peggy and Sonia came in with husbands. And this was the first time I met a woman writer who came in on her own. And she turned out to be one of the greatest writers the Writers Guild has ever seen. Yeah. She was just amazing, and she had an incredible, incredible career until she died way too young. But this was the group, and we had a fantastic time working.
You wrote in your book about the statistics.
Yeah, well, I figured it out when I was writing the book. I didn't figure it out when I was there, that there might have been 40 women writing out of 1,000 men. And more than half of them were with husbands. So Carol was a very unusual person, so was I, and so were a couple of other women that were there.
Now, after that, what sounds like a wonderful experience on Peyton Place, you then decided to take a job on a daytime soap.
Yeah.
Why did you do that?
In retrospect, insanity. I had a very good reason for it. This guy called Oren Tobrov, who was quite a character. He was this Russian who wore a scarf around his neck all the time and a funny hat and spoke with a thick accent. He calls a cattle call to all the writers in the Writers Guild, everyone, come one, come all. And it was at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and a load of people showed up because it was free drinks and free food.
You can always get a writer with free
Yeah.
drinks.
And I knew that nobody was going to take that job. There was no doubt, because we were all snobs. We were nighttime writers. You wouldn't catch us dead writing for daytime. But I took the job because, A, it was in New York City. My family was there. My children hadn't seen their grandparents in a long time. It was New York City. For God's sakes, who wouldn't want to go there for 5 weeks? I was thrilled to go there. And I was going to take the kids to Central Park, and then we, oh my God, the Fiddler on the Roof was playing. There was so much to do, I couldn't wait. I thought this was going to be a piece of cake, daytime. Any idiot could write that. I had no idea what I got myself into, because Oren Tovra was a liar, among other things, and he lied to me. He said I was going to be a head writer, and I was going to have a staff of writers working for me, and there was never another writer. Somehow Oren could never find another writer. In the entire city of New York, he couldn't find another writer. And I told him I had all these women friends in California who were writers, who wanted to be writers. So I go to New York thinking I'm going to have a wonderful time, and instead I end up never, ever leaving the apartment I rented. Your apartment.
I know.
Your apartment. Barbara Minkus, she sublets. I mean, I think everybody in this room I met either 30 or 40 years ago. Just about all of you who I know here. Anyway, Barbara's on her way to do Funny Girl on the trail all across the country, and I sublet her little apartment. But unfortunately, I didn't count on what Oren Tovra was about. Apparently, his show was in the toilet. They were just about to cancel it. And he needed a nighttime writer. And he was going to do whatever it took to get a nighttime writer. And it was crazy, because I had to do a script every single day. Every single day. What did I write? 280 of them 1 year? I forgot. I wrote every single script for 1 whole year by myself.
260.
260. It was called The Doctors. And it was a nightmare. The first week, it took 4 or 5 days to write it. The second week, it took me 3 days to write it. Soon I was dictating it to a machine and throwing it at a woman who'd come to pick it up and bring it to the studio. It was unreal. So I never saw my children. I never, except once, you got to be a star on the show for 5 minutes when they needed a baby on the show. So I got to see my children for about 10 minutes. But I never got to go anywhere. I never got to see any shows. Nothing. I just was churning out these things. And meanwhile, to my immense lack of knowledge, the show was climbing higher in the ratings. And he was more and more not answering my phone calls, because he was not going to get anybody else to help me. And that was my crazy experience there. And I finally got out of it.
How long did you work in, was it just for the summer? Was it 3
I was there for about 5 weeks.
Right, 5 weeks.
God, what a horrible 5 weeks.
But then you got a really good gig. You got to be story editor on Mod Squad.
Yeah, right. Okay. We're going to be here all night if we have to go through all of these shows. And then I wrote, and then I wrote, and then I wrote. Oh my God. Okay, Mod Squad, let's go. All right, Aaron Spelling. I finally meet my bête noire. Yeah. Oh my God, Aaron Spelling comes in and out of my life all the time. So I get this job as a story editor on Mod Squad, and now I'm really getting very interested in the business, and I'm starting to learn about the business, learning about editing, and learning about who works on the show. I'm giving myself an education, which I don't know at the time that I'm going to use very soon. And it was an interesting job, except for one problem. I had to work for, and I name him, Harv Bennett. Now, Very few of you even know who he is. You know who he is. Oh, God. Well, Harv was the kind of writer, he was the line producer, and Aaron was the executive. And I only worked with Harv, but he had a habit of rewriting every script, word by word, line by line, inch by inch, over and over, ad nauseum. This was Mod Squad, for Christ's sakes.
People watch it because the kids were cute.
Yeah, right. I mean, you know, it changed every line. And it was such a joke because the 3 stars couldn't handle more than 3 or 4. And the Link was the funniest one of all. Harv would spend an hour giving you a line. They had to go undercover and they would have to meet these things and do this, and he'd have all this. And Link would cross it all out and say, man. Cool. It was hilarious. And so that I had a lot of trouble with him until one night when my children almost burned down the house and the fire department called me and told me to come home, even though everything was okay. But Harv wouldn't let me leave because he had 40 more pages of a 60-page script to rewrite before morning. And not one word was necessary to be written or changed. It just, anyway. But that's a very long story that goes on to a whole lot of other things I'm not going to get into now. Read the book.
Okay, I'm going to move us along a
Move
little
us
bit.
along.
Okay, you moved from episodes, and you wrote to TV movies. And you wrote one of the first TV movies, I think.
I think it was. I'm not sure anymore, but I think it was one of the first.
Women-
once again, Aaron Spelling.
Women in Chains. I have to say, in Chains, when I was, I worked for Grundy Ufer in Germany, in Berlin, and I helped run the story room for Hintergitten, Women Behind Bars.
Oh, really? Gittern. Okay. That's so funny. Well, so I went to pitch this idea, and this was a movie, the first time, these movies of the week, it was a chance to do movies for television. So I came with a whole lot of great ideas I wanted to sell, and one crappy one, which I didn't really want to do. But they turned out all the ones I wanted, and they wanted the one I didn't want, which was Women in Chains. Oh. Ugh.
Shower scenes.
Oh, yes. And I opened my big mouth, and the first thing I said, look, it's going to be about women in prison, and you know how those movies always are. They're always women scratching each other and tearing each other's hair out. We don't want to do that kind of movie. And Aaron always agreed with everything. Never did the thing you said, but he always agreed. Yes, we don't want any of that. We want a classy movie. And I said, you know, Ida Lupino's a wonderful actress, but she just did a movie that was exactly Women in Chains. And she plays this matron who beats the, you know what, out of all of the... I said, we don't want to do it that way. First person he hires. Anyway, that was the way it was.
But then you did a very classy movie, Death Takes a Holiday.
Yes, that was very classy, with a very classy producer named George Eckstein. But he was wonderful.
And with Myrna Loy and Melvin Douglas.
Douglas, yeah.
Yeah.
That was really interesting. It was first a play, then it was a movie, then it was 2 radio shows, then it was a TV movie, then it made it to the stage as a musical. And then it became a movie with...
Brad Pitt.
Was it Pitts?
Brad Pitt?
I think Brad Pitt
Takes a
was in
Holiday.
it.
Meet Mr. Black.
Joe Black.
Yeah,
Joe
Meet
Black.
Joe Black. Yeah, it came out as with that. So
Okay, well, you and
that was a
Aaron,
good experience.
you and Aaron had a very interesting relationship.
Yes, we certainly did.
You were in his office to pitch MOWs one day, and you sold a network TV series in 30 seconds.
Yes, I did.
How did that happen?
And I don't think Aaron ever told anybody that. I mean, he was not going to tell anybody that. And when I told people that, nobody believed me anyway. So It came about because Aaron was no longer at a studio. He was kind of like almost in trouble for the first time in his career. And he had an office in Century City, of all places. And instead of a big studio office, it was just a little office. Well, it was this size, but you know, for Aaron, this was small. And I walk in, and he's treating me the way he always does. Rita, darling, honey, I'm so glad to see you, you know. And he says, pitch me an idea, pitch me an idea. So I started to pitch him a movie idea, and he's not listening to me. He's running to the phone every minute. And it's ringing, and he said, no, I don't have it. No, I don't have it. And he hangs up. And finally I say to Aaron, what's going on? And he says, it's NBC, and I have 5 minutes to come up with a new series. And I said, that's ridiculous. He says, for 6 months I have been trying to come up with an idea for a new series for them. So, big mouth here, but without thinking, comes out of my mouth, well, why don't you give him Mod Squad again, said I. And he says, what do you mean? He said, well, instead of rookie cops, why don't you have rookie cops? I mean, instead of underground kids, rookie cops. You could call it The Rookies, says I brilliantly. That's 20 seconds. And then he stops and he looks at me and he goes, says, don't move. Yeah. And he runs to the phone and he calls NBC up, the head of NBC. He says, I've got it. It's The Rookies. It's The Rookies. And guess who's in my office? Rita Lakin, that famous writer. Suddenly I'm a famous writer. And she's willing to do it for us. And you know how lucky we are? That was so Aaron. And then he proceeded to ruin it. First thing he did is he fired me off it. And that's the only 2 times I was ever fired. Aaron did this. He fired me off it because I wanted to do an authentic show about cops, which had never happened. Steve Bochco hadn't done it yet. Steve Bochco was about 8 years behind me. I think it was about 8 years before he came up with Hill Street. But I said, I'm going to go and I'm going to really talk to these rookie cops. I'm going to go to their school. I'm going to get real good stories. It's going to be a different kind of show. Well, NBC didn't want a different kind of show.
No, I think when they went to Aaron Spelling, they knew what kind of show
they wanted. You know what they wanted. And Aaron was going to give them what they wanted. It was fantasy stuff. Women who were gorgeous and men who were gorgeous, and you know, and shoot 'em up, cop stuff, and that's what he wanted.
So then you moved on to prestigious MOWs. Do you want to talk about them?
No.
Okay.
If we keep going, nobody's going to want to read the book.
Oh, okay.
We're doing the whole book here. Let's just go. Let's get to the raffle. Who said that? Who said that? Who said that? Let's get to the raffle. Wait a minute. We'll talk about something else that I want to talk about.
Okay.
Well, you already know I turned down Dallas. That was really brilliant of me. I thought it was a stupid idea.
You know, I thought David Jacobs came up with that because he really did family.
He did it right.
He did it right.
I would not have.
He really did a comedy about rich people.
Right. If I had gotten that job, I would have ruined it because I would not have done any of that.
Yeah.
No, so it worked out well. 14 years of royalties and residuals I didn't get.
I have a question.
What's
and
your
this is not in your book.
Oh, thank God.
You became the showrunner for a second time on Flamingo Road.
Yeah.
Who is Skip Eastport?
I don't know.
I go on IMDb Pro, and every script is written by Skip Eastport. Maybe it was you had a writing room and you just called it Skip Eastport? No?
Maybe that doesn't mean what you think it is. Are you sure you read it right?
Maybe. Well, I could have made a mistake. I read it a couple of times.
Where did you read that? I have to see that.
IMDb Pro.
I'll have to look. Everybody take out your iPods that you're all... And I have no idea what that is.
They weren't,
Flamingo Road?
There was no Skip Eastport.
There's one of the writers on Flamingo Road, the one who keeps just giving me trouble over there, Frank Furino. He was one of my writers.
Okay. I thought maybe it was done as a group. And
No, nothing like
okay.
that. No, I actually was able to hire women writers for a change, and newcomer writers, and even men writers who hadn't had jobs before. It was wonderful. I don't know who's. I think it must mean skip something. You're reading something that you're supposed to skip over.
Skip support. You'll look it up.
I will. Okay.
Then 2 years later, we're going to skip Dynasty.
Yes, please let's skip Dynasty. That was not a good experience.
You got to create another show.
Can I just say one thing about
Yeah.
Dynasty? Because you know this story, is that they gave me a writer to work with, partnered me with a writer, and it turned out he had actually murdered his wife, really murdered his wife. And he was really very strange.
You shared an office with him.
I had to share an office with him. His toupee kept falling off. It's not very kind of me, but I don't have to always be kind.
Now,
Rita, remember his name?
I have it written down here somewhere. I don't remember, but he wrote a novel about it. He actually murdered his wife and got off, and then he wrote a novel about it. Is it on yours?
No,
I don't remember anyway. Now you really have to buy the book so you can find out.
I wanted you to talk about the next series that you, because they all need to know this, the next series that you created for Aaron Spelling.
Oh, well. We're almost at the end of the book, folks. This is Nightingales. I'm skipping all the stuff about my private life, and I'm skipping about my love life, and I'm skipping about my children, and
Yeah, you'll have to read the book.
don't ask any questions because I won't answer them. It's all in the book, though. And if my ex ever reads it, I'm a dead person. Okay, Nightingales. This is the end of my career. It's a really fascinating story. Frank was there. He co-created it with me. And my son, my other son, Howard, was the other co-creator. And we came up with this rather nice idea about these women nurses. It seemed like a good show to do. Their love life, the medical stories. We had a lot of good stuff.
There before Chandraland.
Oh, God, yeah. Well, the truth of the story is Aaron was way ahead of his time, because what he did then, we got thrown off the air for doing. That's the irony of it now, because I was so angry at him. We were so angry at him for ruining our show. Because, all right, I'm going to read what it was. So he goes to Brandon Tartikoff, who's the head of NBC, and this is how he sells the show. Student nurses in Dallas. It's the summer heat wave, and there's no air conditioning, and they sweat a lot. And Brandon Tartikoff, is he still around? No. Okay. He says, it's a 40 share, let's do it. So this was a very, very interesting experience in that there was a man named Ken Alouetta, I think I'm pronouncing it right, Analetta, who wrote a nonfiction book called Three Blind Mice. And I knew nothing about this. He went to the 3 networks, and they picked 3 different shows and gave Ken the permission, because he was going to write a book about all this. It gave him to follow 3 shows, one on ABC, one on NBC, one on CBS. And he got to follow Flamingo Road from beginning to end. I never met him. I never knew he was there. But I never knew what was going on. And I never found out until after I was off the show, because that was the second and last time I got fired, when there was a strike, the famous 88 strike, was it? 88 strike. And when we all came back to work, there was a letter on my front of my house from Aaron saying, love means never having to say you're sorry. You're fired. The networks wants younger people. He even was stupid enough to say it in the letter, because when the Committee on Ageism came, I had proof that they said at the network I was too old. I was, 57 or 8 or whatever it was. So what happened there was that Aaron kept pushing the envelope, and the NBC wanted it pushed even more. Ken writes in his book, and I quoted him a lot because it's very interesting, how everybody at NBC used to come to dailies every day. No matter who worked at NBC, they all came to dailies because it was porno. Well, porno for that time. It was porno for that time because the women were always going in and out of showers and you got to see little bits of a shoulder or whatever the hell it was.
You should tell them that they used to call the nurses Charlie's nurses.
Yeah, Charlie's Nurses, that was our other name for it. But he was, he was trying to do a very sexy show. And in terms of Showtime today, that show that he did would have been tame.
Oh, yeah.
That's the irony of it all. It got thrown off the air. Lee Iacocca made a speech to America saying, you cannot make whores out of nurses. Get that show off the air. And it got thrown out after they fired us.
Do you want to take questions now, or?
Sure, why not?
Okay, yeah, because I think this is.
I'm done.
I-